Hello, welcome to our first official lecture. You'll be seeing one of these every week, and hopefully, it will help you have a better understanding of some of the material you've been reading for that week, and it will just help you process some things. I imagine seeing each one of you in my mind's eye and just wishing that I could sit over a cup of coffee and just visit with you about these things. But because of the age that we live in, this is what our education looks like. So forgive me for the talking head, and hopefully you'll be able to get a lot from these videos. Just to give you an idea of what to expect, I'm hoping to keep these fairly short. I plan on them being about 10 to 15 minutes each. And during the video, of course, you're going to see just little quizzes pop up just to see if you're comprehending the material. And that is going to be your attendance for that particular week, is to watch the video and take the quiz. So in general, my plan is that the videos won't reiterate everything in the textbook. You're still going to be responsible for that material and to know it well. But my hope is that with the videos that you will get some supplemental information, maybe some information that will help you process it just a little bit better and will make it interesting to you. So I'm going to be shutting off the screen of me in just a moment and going to a PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully that will help you to learn a little bit more. So thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and I hope that you can learn something. So if you do have any questions, as always, please do let me know. So let's get started with this week's lecture, which specifically we're going to be focusing on communication and culture and how they interact. But before I do that, I want to get into communication just a little bit.
So as I mentioned, we're going to start by defining communication. But today we're going to be covering information from chapters 1 and 2. And so I'm going to be combining those together a little bit. You're going to notice that this is going to be just a slightly longer presentation because I need to try to cover both those chapters. But I promise I'll try to keep it semi-short so that you don't have to spend much time listening to me and just staring at a PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and get started by discussing the question, what is communication? So the best way to start this is to look at the root word. So if you take the word communication and you look at the root word of communication, that root is comm, C-O-M-M. And if you think of the other words that start with comm, like community or communion or commonplace or any of those other words that also have that root word, all of those words possess something in common, and that is that it involves two or more people. So there is a commonality because there are two things being brought together. So if you think of all the different comm words, they all will start with that root word. And when I was in college, I learned that the definition of communication was a common understanding of meaning. So for example, these two boys that are in this picture in front of you, they both need to have a common understanding of what's being said in order to have successful communication. So they both do need to speak the same language. Otherwise, they will not have a common understanding of the meaning of what is being spoken. So if one of them is speaking Russian and the other one is speaking French, no communication is going to happen because they do not have a common understanding of the meaning. But a better definition of what it means to communicate is to share information through a process of joining others together. Now, there is such a thing as intrapersonal communication, which is I-N-T-R-A, personal communication, and that is communication within yourself, and that doesn't involve other people. But any other thing that we do involves other people and joining them together. But for our purposes in this class of interpersonal communication, the definition is going to be a process or exchange of information, ideas and feelings between two or more people through verbal or nonverbal methods. So again, interpersonal communication is the process or exchange of information, ideas and feelings between two or more people through verbal and or nonverbal methods. So that leads us very quickly to the issue of culture. And so if we have a quick definition of communication, then let's do a quick definition of culture. And I have a fish here, not to be silly, but to actually kind of prove the point of culture. So culture is interwoven into every aspect of who we are as individuals and as relational beings. And so a fish in water doesn't notice the water. It is so a part of its life that it doesn't even recognize that that is the environment that it's in because it's so interwoven to its daily life. But if you take that fish out of water, the fish will notice that something drastic has changed. Not only will it die, but it just can't function outside of its own environment. Well, culture is a lot like that. When our culture, we are in our culture, no matter what culture you might come from, that is part of who you are. And so much so, it's like the water. And if we take you out of that culture, then you will definitely notice and you will be aware of your environment in a different way. So let's define what is culture. And I'm sure you have many ideas running through your mind of what is culture. But the easiest definition I can find is this ongoing negotiation of learned patterns, beliefs, attitudes, values, and behaviors among a group. So I can have a culture of a hearing impaired community, and that community of hearing impaired individuals would have a culture that is their own and defines who they are and impacts them. Or I might have a fitness culture, a group of fitness people community that has their own way of communicating because they're involved in the same culture. But I can also have an international culture as well, correct? Or even maybe just a culture within the United States. So other types of international cultures that kind of come into the US. And so it all is so intertwined and interwoven into our daily life that we almost can't separate it. So when you go to a different culture, and culture in general is like an iceberg, a third of it's visible to people who are on the outside, and 2/3 is invisible. So think of like a group of friends that you might have that are part of a similar culture. So let's say people are skateboarders and they have a skateboarding community, and it really is its own culture. There's clothing that you wear that's part of skateboarding community. There's language that you use as part of the skateboarding community. So a third of that is going to be visible to someone from the outside. So someone like me who's not a part of that community would see it, and I would see a third of that, and I might feel like I'm understanding it. But truthfully, there's 2/3 of that that's invisible and that we can't know unless we are immersed in that community and know it better. So this applies again like something like a skateboarding community, or it could apply to an international community. If you take me and put me in Norway, I will probably be able to observe and learn about a third of the culture, but 2/3 I would have a very difficult time learning, especially as a person coming from another culture and country. So how is culture kind of created? What is it that makes up culture? What's our cultural identity? And I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. There's 6 regulators of cultural identity. There's religion, our nation, our nationalism, what makes us who we are from our country of origin, the class that we belong to. And as much as we would like to say that we don't have class in the United States, we do. We have upper, middle, and lower class, and we have educated and uneducated. And if you were to look at the class system of somewhere like India that has a caste system, class is a very pivotal part of their culture. And I got an opportunity to spend some time in India, and I spent a really special time with some people who are considered the untouchables of the caste system. And the caste system has those that are at the top, which are called the Brahmas, and then at the very, very lowest level is the caste system, and is the untouchables. And they actually, the caste system is like a body, so the Brahmas are considered the head. Well, there is a caste level that is considered the foot, but the untouchables are considered below the foot. So they are not even a part of the body. And I was talking to this specific man who was just absolutely lovely from the untouchable group. And he has been a toilet washer all of his life. That's the job that he does. And I was visiting with him because we were actually there kind of supporting his wife who was starting a new business. And so their opportunities were going to change a little bit. And I was being a typical American, I guess, and I asked the question, if you could do any job, what would you choose? I said, what would be your dream? And his response was, I would wash the finest toilets at the finest hotels in India. And it was so evident to me that you cannot separate the class part of our culture from who we are, that they are just really intertwined. The next one is gender. What is your identity is based upon your gender. And this one has been up in conversation a lot lately because we've seen gender identity becoming a hot topic that people are really discussing and wanting to give input and feedback on. Race, skin color, and ethnicity are part of our cultural identity. They kind of make up who we are. And of course, the civilization that we come from, whether you come from a Western civilization, an Eastern civilization, an African civilization, a Middle Eastern civilization, all of those will impact us culturally. So now that we've looked at what communication is and what culture is, let's define intercultural communication. And it is something that occurs when people with different culture or co-cultural groups interact with each other. So it could be a smaller community that's in the United States that you might interact with and realize, oh, I'm really different from them. It could be a religious group that you differ from, or it could be, like I said earlier, you might be a skateboarder and part of the skate community, and you're interacting with someone who is an older generation who's never been a part of that. That would be interacting with among different cultural or co-cultural groups. So intercultural communication. The goal is that miscommunication can happen so much in intercultural communication. So the goal is that good learning and techniques can actually limit some of that miscommunication that's taking place. So before I go much farther, though, I just want to take a second because this is an area that I want to make sure you understand from the reading. In the book this week, it talks about high and low structure orientation. I also want to just draw your attention to the fact that this will sometimes in the research be called uncertainty avoidance. So high and low structure orientation can be uncertainty avoidance, or UA. So let me give you an example. So a high UA culture might be a country like Japan. A low UA culture would be a country like America. So let me tell you what are some of the qualities that might happen with a high uncertainty avoidance culture. So in a high uncertainty avoidance culture, they have a lower tolerance for ambiguity or confusion. They want more clarity. They might have anxiety around uncertainty. They want more structure, and the norms regulate interaction. So there's a lot of different norms that control and regulate interaction. So in a low uncertainty avoidance culture, they are more tolerant for ambiguity. They don't mind confusion quite as much. Uncertainty is actually embraced and challenged a bit. Communication can be less structured, and there are fewer rituals in the interaction. So for a second, I want you to imagine a business where an employee is meeting a boss for the first time. And I want you to think of a low uncertainty avoidance, or like the United States, and I want you to imagine how that employee would approach that employer and how they would probably shake hands, they would look at each other, they would smile, they would just be like, nice to meet you. It would be very cordial. You would be aware that one was more in a power position, but it wouldn't be super obvious who was necessarily from just observing. Now let's take the high uncertainty avoidance culture and let's go back to Japan and let's have the same scenario. So a boss meeting an employee for the first time. The difference is that there would be some rituals that need to take place. There would be a polite bow. There would be, from the employee's perspective, language choice that reflects their awareness that they are talking to a supervisor by using more formalized language. There would also probably be a less eye contact on the part of the employee in order to try to pay respect to the employer. So you can see how if you take those two cultures, just start to put them together, some conflicts can arise. So uncertainty avoidance is an important part of culture. So now, hopefully, most of you have taken COM 101, public speaking, and you've seen this model of communication, and I don't need to explain it very much. But in Western communication, we have studied and looked at how communication happens. But in just a moment, I'm going to compare this Western model of communication with the Eastern model of communication. So Western model of communication, we have senders and receivers. So both of those smiley people or smiley faces are the sender and receiver, because both of them are sending messages and both of them are receiving messages, even if they're intentionally or unintentionally doing it. So you can see the message, how are you? And the other person might be looking at making eye contact, so they're also sending a message back of I'm paying attention. And then that message is comprised of verbal and nonverbal symbols. So a symbol is something that stands for something else. So if I take the word table and I tell you that I'm going to put that on the table, you have an idea of a flat surface with 4 legs on it. Somebody at some point in time assigned the word that we know as table to that object, and now we can all agree upon it. So that message, it can be pretty clear because there's something tangible that goes with that symbol. But if I take a word like truth or beauty or justice, those words are a little more difficult. And although you might know the definition of those words, your definition from someone else's might vary. Now, then let's throw in the whole nonverbal aspect of communication. And I've read anywhere from 70 to 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So that's a lot. And if we have different ways of encoding and decoding that nonverbal communication, conflict can arise if we're not careful. So messages, sender, receiver. The third one is channel. And the channel is the route in which the message is delivered, whether that's face-to-face, through texting, through the internet, through email, over the radio, face-to-face, I think I already said that one, but all those different ways are the way in which the message is delivered to the person. And so the channel is like a river. If you think of a river channel, it controls the course of the communication, the same way that channels in communication, the channel of a river controls the course of the water, the same way that the channel of communication controls the course of the message. Feedback is another important part of the model of communication, that we provide feedback when we're speaking. And you'll notice the little kind of starred things, those are called noise. That's what I knew them as when I was studying communication in the beginning. It's also called interference. And so anything that gets in the way of the communication is considered interference or noise. And this can happen internally and externally. So for example, if I'm talking to a friend and my child runs up and starts talking to me and is really excited and making lots of sounds, it is interrupting, creating an actual noise that is interfering with the communication. Likewise, that would be an external interference, but what if I am hungry and I'm trying to talk to someone, but I'm very hungry? That would be an internal kind of interference that really does impact the ability to communicate well. And then finally, the situation or setting in which the communication takes place. So that's what a Western model of communication looks like. And that's kind of how we've studied it. It's how Western civilization has tended to look at communication and how we've absorbed it and taught it. But let's just take that model and let's compare it to an Eastern approach to communication. So that word on the right is harmony. And in what Eastern communication, harmony is the key. Harmony is very important. And so it's something that's kind of to be held very highly. So there is this product or process of right conduct in communication. And most Eastern communicators have, whether they have intentionally been or unintentionally, have been influenced by Confucianism and Buddhism in different Eastern approaches. And there's this idea that good communication results from 4 positive aspects of human nature. And those 4 positive aspects are being human, humanism, being righteous, propriety, the way you carry yourself in communication, and then the wisdom that you bring to that communication. So those 4 qualities are they're esteemed and they're meant to be represented in communication. But the idea is that communication can deteriorate from the influence of emotion, specifically the 7 emotions. And so, if you're in communication with someone, if you express joy, anger, sorrow, fear, love, hate, or desire as part of your communication process, then you are actually deteriorating the communication process. So, can you imagine someone from an Eastern communication or cultural setting communicating with someone from a Western cultural setting? And so the Eastern approach is to have harmony in the communication, and the Western approach is just to send messages back and forth, and that there isn't necessarily a lot of propriety with that. Then you can see how there could be conflict, and there is a reason that countries go to war. And so some of this is because of our culture and how we communicate and how we share those different ideas. In Eastern culture, collectivism is really, it's the best. It's what everybody seeks to embrace, is that they work for the collective whole. But in Western culture, we tend to be more individualistic. We want to stand out, stand apart. And again, that can be esteemed in the Western culture, but being individualism or individualistic in Eastern culture and communication could be very difficult, and it might make the communication almost impossible. Plus, the person would seem very rude in a Eastern communication setting. So you can see how culture plays a huge part in this. So how do we start this journey of effective communication across cultures? So I just have 5 quick tips for you. The first is observe the situation without judgment. Whenever you're in a cultural situation where the culture is unfamiliar to you, try not to judge it. Try not to think, oh, this is silly. Instead, try to approach it with, this is new. How interesting. And just observe the situation. Again, this can happen in your daily life wherever you are. It could just be a small community that you notice is different from you. The second is tolerate ambiguity. When you feel a little bit uncomfortable or confused, or you're not quite sure what's going on, try to tolerate it a little bit. Try to just kind of accept it and just pay attention just a little more. Practice perception flipping. Try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Try to imagine where they're coming from. It would help us so much if we did this better, and it would make communication in general so much better. All the things I'm saying right now would be really great to use on your social media if you use social media, because it will make you a better communicator in general, but especially across cultures. It's helpful if you can refrain your thoughts or your mental questions. So rather than having thoughts like, oh, what they just did was ridiculous, having the question, oh, I'm curious why they did that behavior. It really can change just by reframing that, reframing your mindset, your thoughts, your mental questions. It'll help you to understand or try to understand more. And finally, cultivate a motivation and view communication as an opportunity. And I would challenge you to do this in all areas of your life, culturally and non-culturally, that you cultivate a motivation to view communication as an opportunity. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.